Wild speculation. Let's engage in just a little bit of wild speculation. So people have been asking, Shannon, what coaches do you think are going to be on the hot seat? So I thought I'd take a look back to last November. November of 2018. Who was supposed to be on the hot seat? According to Sportsnet in November, they said Randy Carlyle. Well, he's gone. Mike Sullivan in Pittsburgh. Probably not on the hot seat right now. Dave Haxtell in Philly. He's gone. Rick Tocchet in Arizona. He's sticking around. I just watched them against Minnesota. I can't see Tocchet being out in Arizona, even if they miss at this point. Guy Boucher in Ottawa. Good call by Sportsnet. Still a shock when he was gone out of Ottawa. Bugner in Florida. Still employed. And you ask yourself, is it Bugner's fault that the goaltending failed him early on in the year? So what I've done here is I've listed this by reverse order of standings coming into today's action. So before any of the games were finals. And only included teams that are out of the playoffs or two teams that were tied for that last playoff spot coming into today, because why not? Now the problem is Columbus has jumped past Carolina. So should I put Carolina on the board? The right answer to that is no. Even if Carolina misses the playoffs, the coach is not going to get fired. I think Carolina's been pretty happy about things this year. And if they fail, Rod Brindamore isn't going anywhere. At the top of the board, we got the Ottawa Senators. Mark Crawford. Now, at the time he's hired, it's as an interim, and they put out this this resume, this want list, this checklist of what they want in their next coach. It's basically a list of, well, duh, is what it is your answer to it, because all of them are things that, yeah, you could easily figure out. These are things you're going to want in a coach. Wanted. Coach who will play the right players and helps us and makes us better and likes people and doesn't punch his players. Like, just, it wasn't that list, but April Fool's is tomorrow, Shannon. It's tomorrow. So I'm going to digress. If Mark Crawford wants this job, he should be allowed to keep it. Ottawa's been better since he took over, and I think if he goes to management and says to Pierre Dorian, yeah, I want the torture of coaching this team next year, I think he'll probably be the most qualified candidate for the Ottawa Senators. I can't see there being a more qualified coach who would raise their hand and say, I want a piece of coaching the Senators next year. Willie Desjardins in LA, hired as a stopgap. I haven't seen anything with the LA Kings to make me think that Desjardins is going to keep his job past this season. I would be very surprised if he's not out. Doesn't mean he's out immediately after the season ends. It just means that they will start their search for a brand new coach pretty quick after. Whether they get rid of him and then start that search or what they do, I don't know. But I don't think Desjardins is going to stick around. John Hines with New Jersey, we know he's sticking around. New Jersey fans are torn on whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. Jeff Blashill in Detroit, we know he's sticking around based on the way Detroit's played the last 2 weeks. Maybe that's a good thing based on the other 24 weeks of the season. I don't know. We'll see. And again, do you blame the coach when the roster isn't good enough? Well, of course you do. That's what GMs do. That's how they keep their jobs. Phil Housley in Buffalo, if you had told me a month ago that Housley's job would have been in trouble, I would have said, nah, he's got some slack. The only reason I can see why Housley would keep his job is if they can't find somebody that feel is better than Housley to do it. And or because they're worried that so many coaching changes is basically making it so that a coach can't command the room. You end up with a culture where it's like, well, if we don't like his message and we play badly, he's gone in a week. So sort of what happened at one point with Edmonton, it seemed like they were changing coaches constantly. David Quinn with the Rangers, he will get at least another year. He's not going anywhere. But I do think, back to the Housley thing, I have a funny feeling Housley will find himself out at the end of this season. Does Lindy Ruff go back to Buffalo? There's a thought. There's a thought. And anybody who'd say that'll never happen. We didn't think Ken Hitchcock was ever going to coach again either. Bob Murray will not be staying behind the bench in Anaheim. He came in to replace Randy Carlyle to stop the bleeding. And he's actually done a pretty good job, hands off, letting the assistant coaches run it. Now, he could throw a curveball and decide while standing behind the bench, you know what? Assistant coach, one of these guys would actually make a pretty darn good head coach. or he goes the route we all know he's going to take, which is Dallas Eakins. Dallas Eakins has been groomed for the job, and Oiler fans are probably snickering watching this. Stop it. Ducks fans don't know yet, and you just never know. Tom Rennie went on from a bad showing with Vancouver to have... Tom Rennie's a good guy. You guys shouldn't bring up Tom Rennie like it's not nice. Ken Hitchcock in Edmonton, he wants to stay, but all indications are he's driving Toby Reeder to the airport, and then he'll go, "Why are there 2 tickets?" And they'll be like, "All right, so thanks for your help, Kenny. This'll take you wherever you want to go." No, we're good, thanks. Travis Green will stick around with Vancouver. He will get at least this 3rd season. Now, if the Canucks fail next year with the young lineup they have, then we may look at Travis Green being out, and at that point, Jim Benning's job would definitely become a talking point. I know there are Canuck fans eager to see Benning get fired, just like they wanted Brian Burke fired, just like they wanted Pat Quinn fired, and just like they wanted Mike Gillis fired immediately. Now there are people crying for the firing of Jim Benning. Being a general manager in a Canadian city is just as thankless as Brian Burke said it was. So yeah, Green will stick around for at least another year with Vancouver. Jeremy Colleton with Chicago, he'll stick around, I think, for at least another year. Can't see any reason why Chicago would get rid of him. Bruce Boudreau in Minnesota. There's a reason I'm wearing Minnesota. That's an interesting one. So Minnesota goes out today, and it was a miserable game for them. Now, Darcy Kemper's playing great and all, but for Minnesota, they really shouldn't be in this position, or should they? Paul Fenton made moves at the deadline, which confused us and made us think he was selling. Then they went on this little mini run that made us think, okay, he knew what he was doing. And now they've fallen right out of the race. Now, if Minnesota somehow wins the draft lottery, then we're talking about something else. But in and around everything, does Bruce Boudreau find himself out of work? That's a question. If they decide they're going to have to do the rebuild, because they are the oldest team in the league, does Bruce Boudreau find himself out of work? I don't think he'd find himself out of work for very long, but he could find himself out. Bob Bugner in Florida is an interesting case because Florida, I don't know, last year they played well enough to make the playoffs and barely missed. Would have made it in the West. This year, it was a disaster out of the gate. They haven't been horrible. They haven't been good enough. I don't know. Do you put that on Bugner? Do you not? You look at the offense that's being put up right now. You look at the fact that the goaltending numbers just haven't been good enough. Do you just try to go out and get Bobrovsky this summer and keep Bugner and see how that works? He might be on a short leash in the fall, but maybe he sticks around. Scott Gordon in Philly. I honestly think he should stay. I know he came in with the interim tag, but I think he should. I think Philly's been pretty solid with him behind the bench. And while they've tailed off, I mean, today was a miserable day because, as the announcer said during the game, there is no worse feeling than having to play the day after you know your team's been eliminated from the playoffs. You're listless. You don't want to be there. It's a miserable feeling. So I don't look at today's game with Philly and say, oh, well, now they're going to just tank and this is a problem and, oh, look what's happening. Today's game is just kind of that's to be expected the day after that emotional experience of being eliminated from playoff contention. I do think Scott Gordon has an easy chance of sticking around. Rick Tocchet, I can't see him going. Jared Bednar, if Colorado misses the playoffs, like if Arizona knocked them out, I think it would at least be looked at. I think Joe Sakic would at least look at whether or not Bednar would stay based on Colorado made it last year, and if they just barely missed this year. Does he look and say, you know what, we were missing Rottinen, we were missing Landeskog at points, we had a lot of injury problems. I don't really put that on Bednar. We had goaltending issues at one point as well. Or does he say, no, we need a new voice behind the bench? Claude Julien in Montreal is safe. And if Claude Julien misses the playoffs 2 straight years with Montreal, and he keeps his job, I would have to think that is a rarity for the Montreal Canadiens. That any coach can miss the playoffs in back-to-back seasons and still be the coach of the Montreal Canadiens. This is a franchise that does not put up with mediocrity in their history, and so it's strange to think that they likely don't move away from Claude Julien. John Tortorella in Columbus, I do think that John Tortorella, should Columbus miss the playoffs, he could find himself out. It depends on how close his relationship with Jarmo is and what Yarmo's direction is coming out of this season. If his direction coming out of this season is, well, we're not going to keep these guys and we may end up in a retool/rebuild of our own, Tortorella may not be the guy to man you through or to run the show through a rebuild. If he feels that they're still going to be a playoff team and they can keep themselves in the running, Tortorella very well could stick around with Columbus. 50-50 odds on that one. It depends on where the GM sees the team next year and what the plan is for them going forward. So available coaches, just of note. Joel Quenneville, his name is going to be out there. It's going to be tied to everybody. You have to go to Chicago and talk to them. Chicago Blackhawks, I don't think will block him from going to any other city. Even if St. Louis were to make him an offer, I don't think they'd block him. But I think St. Louis is happy with Craig Berube right now. It's amazing what a difference a few months will make. LM Vigneault's out there. He's an interesting topic for discussion. Would he fit in Edmonton? Would Vigneault work there? Vigneault's really a good guy, and I think he's a good coach, and I'd like to see him get another job. And I think there are a few places you might be able to put him, and it'll work. Todd McClellan, who of course got fired by the Oilers earlier this year, he's got an extensive resume, could find himself work as well. If Bob Murray decides, you know what, I'm not sure with Dallas Eakins, maybe he would go in that direction, because McClellan's coached in California before and done well. Sheldon Keefe, I've got a little asterisk next to him because Toronto's got him tied up, right? Now, I don't have Toronto on the board here because Mike Babcock makes $80 million a year or whatever it is. But it is interesting that word has it that Sheldon Keefe of the Toronto Marlies is going to get locked down to a contract by the Toronto management team that will make him the highest paid American Hockey League coach in history. The idea being that Kyle Dubas doesn't want to lose Sheldon Keefe to another organization and fashions him as the next head coach for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Mike Babcock, and this is again the Toronto media speculating, may very well not like that. And if Toronto goes out in the first round, does Sheldon Keefe end up being the coach of the Toronto Maple Leafs? Dubas has made it clear. This is his team. It's going to be skill. And there's been some headbutting between Babcock and Dubas with his vision of the team. A lot of these Marlies that have now come up to join the Toronto Maple Leafs were coached by Sheldon Keefe. And you would think that a good young team, they may call him up as their next head coach. So that's one to keep in mind because he's been attached to coaching jobs, over the last couple of years, and Toronto wants to lock him down, thus giving him a ton of money. Another name of interest, and I understand there's going to be two fan bases that say no. Mike Yeo. Mike Yeo's out there. Coaches do get recycled. It does happen. There may be a team that finds a home for Mike Yeo. He does tend to have a pretty solid impact for that first while that he's there. Does it wear off? Yes. But he could be the right voice behind one of these benches. It's possible. So there you go. Just looking at coaches of teams that are out. And I have to mention the Toronto situation because it is weird. It is strange. But Mike Babcock, things could come to a head after this playoffs. If the Boston Bruins manhandle the Toronto Maple Leafs, if they take him out in 4, if it's a physical series and that player that Babcock desperately wanted, whether it's a right-hand defenseman or it's that physical player, he doesn't get it and the Toronto Maple Leafs get manhandled, what could Babcock end up doing? So that's the conversation we could be having in a few weeks. But for now, here you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about which coach may or may not be on the hot seat. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. And there are other coaches of teams that are going into the playoffs who could be in that position as well. I just wanted to look at teams outside the playoffs. And then as the playoffs roll along, we may start seeing some dominoes fall with the head coaching ranks. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.